Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France. I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now, let's dive into the story. The phone rang at exactly 11:47 p.m., cutting through the silence of Dr. ADEMOYE's empty penthouse like a knife through glass. She sat in her leather chair, staring at the city lights beyond her floor-to-ceiling windows, a half-empty glass of whiskey trembling in her hand. She had stopped answering calls months ago. Colleagues, friends, reporters, they all wanted the same thing: to dissect her failure, to understand how the country's most celebrated neurosurgeon had let a 7-year-old girl die on her operating table. The phone kept ringing. Her finger hovered over the decline button, but something stopped her. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the storm outside rattling her windows. Maybe it was the small, desperate part of her that still wanted to save someone. She pressed accept. "Please," a child's voice cracked through static and rain. "Please help me. My uncle, he's not breathing right. There's blood. I don't know what to do." Adana's heart stopped. This wasn't a colleague. This wasn't a reporter. This was a child, alone, terrified, calling the wrong number at the worst possible moment. Adana's medical training kicked in before her emotions could catch up. "Listen to me carefully," she said, her voice steady despite the pounding in her chest. "Is he breathing at all? Can you see his chest moving?" The boy's breath came in short, panicked gasps. I think so. But he got shocked. He was fixing wires in the rain, and then he just fell. Thunder crashed outside Adana's window, and through the phone, she heard the same thunder echoing a heartbeat later. The boy was somewhere in the city, somewhere close. "What's your name?" she asked, already grabbing her medical bag from the hallway closet. "Liam," he whispered. "Liam Okoro. I'm 12. I tried calling my friend, but I pressed the wrong contact, and I don't know who you are, but please don't hang up." His voice broke on the last word, and something inside Adana shattered with it. She hadn't heard that kind of raw fear since the night she lost her patient. The night she heard the mother's screams echoing through the hospital corridors. "I'm not hanging up, Liam," she said, slipping into her coat. "I'm a doctor. Tell me exactly where you are." Liam's directions came in fragments between sobs. Westbridge District. Behind the old textile factory, Uncle Chima's auto repair. The words painted a picture of the city's forgotten corner, where broken machines went to die and people like Liam learned to survive among the wreckage. Adana knew the area. She'd driven past it 1,000 times on her way to the hospital, always looking straight ahead, never stopping, never acknowledging the poverty that pressed against her tinted windows. Now she was driving straight into it. Rain hammered her windshield as she navigated the narrow, potholed streets. Her GPS lost signal twice. The streetlights here were broken or missing entirely, leaving only the occasional flicker of light from windows covered with plastic sheets and cardboard. She found the workshop wedged between 2 crumbling buildings, its metal sign hanging by a single rusty chain. Her headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating a boy standing in the doorway, soaked to the bone, his thin frame shaking from cold and fear. Their eyes met through the rain, and Adana saw something that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Hope. She grabbed her medical bag and ran through the downpour, her expensive shoes sinking into mud and oil-slicked puddles. Liam led her inside without a word, his bare feet making soft splashing sounds on the concrete floor. The workshop smelled of gasoline, rust, and something else. Burnt flesh. Uncle Chima lay on his back near an exposed electrical panel, his right hand blackened, his chest rising and falling in shallow, irregular gasps. Adana dropped to her knees beside him, her fingers already checking his pulse, her mind calculating the damage. Electrical shock, possible cardiac arrhythmia, burns, possible internal injuries. She worked with the precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times. But her hands shook slightly as she opened her bag. Liam knelt across from her, watching every movement with intense, intelligent eyes. "Hand me the small blue pouch," she instructed. And without hesitation, Liam reached into her bag and pulled out exactly what she needed. Their eyes met again over the unconscious man's body, and Adana realized something startling. This child understood. He knew what she was doing. He was learning. 20 minutes later, Uncle Chima's breathing stabilized. Adana had administered medication, cleaned and dressed the burns, and set up a makeshift IV drip using supplies from her bag and tools Liam had quietly handed her. Always the right tool, always at the right moment, as if he could read her mind. She sat back on her heels, exhausted, her silk blouse ruined with mud and blood. Liam hadn't moved. He sat perfectly still, his dark eyes fixed on his uncle's face, waiting for permission to breathe. "He'll live," Adana said softly. "But he needs to go to a hospital. I'll call an ambulance." Liam's head snapped up, panic flooding his features. "No, please. Uncle Chima says hospitals cost too much. He'll be angry if we... He trailed off, and Adana saw the fear there. Not fear of death, but fear of punishment. She recognized that look. She'd seen it before in the eyes of children brought to the emergency room with injuries that didn't match the stories their guardians told. Something was wrong here. Very wrong. Adana made a decision that would change everything. "I'll come back tomorrow," she said, pulling out her phone and taking a photo of Liam's face before he could protest. "To check on him, to make sure the burns don't get infected." She wrote her number on a piece of paper torn from a grimy notebook lying among scattered tools. "If anything changes, if he gets worse, if you need help, you call this number. Not the wrong one this time. This one." Liam took the paper with trembling fingers, staring at it like it was a winning lottery ticket. "Why are you helping us?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't even know us." Adana paused at the doorway, rain still hammering the metal roof above them. She looked back at this brilliant, frightened child standing in a pool of dirty water, surrounded by broken engines and shattered dreams. And she saw herself, the girl she used to be before medical school, before success, before she built walls so high that nothing could hurt her anymore. "Because someone once helped me when they didn't have to," she lied. The truth was simpler and more painful. Because maybe, just maybe, saving this boy could save her too. 6 months earlier, Dr. Adana Miles had stood in the center of her operating room, surrounded by the best surgical team in the country, and watched a 7-year-old girl named Zara die. The aneurysm had been operable. The procedure was one Adana had performed successfully dozens of times. But her hands had hesitated, just for 3 seconds. When she saw the scans, when she recognized a pattern she'd seen before. When doubt crept into her mind like poison. 3 seconds. That's all it took. 3 seconds of uncertainty in a career built on absolute confidence, and the girl's brain began to bleed faster than they could control it. Adana remembered the moment with perfect, horrible clarity. The monitor's steady beep transforming into a flatline scream. The surgical nurse's sharp intake of breath. The desperate 40 minutes of trying to restart a heart that had already given up. She remembered walking into the waiting room afterward, her scrubs still stained, and telling Zara's mother that her daughter was gone. The mother's scream had echoed through the hospital corridors, a sound that followed Adana home, that waited for her in the silence of her penthouse, that whispered in her dreams. She had killed a child, not through negligence or incompetence, but through doubt. And doubt, in her profession, was the same as murder. The hospital board had cleared her after a formal investigation. Medical complications, they called it. An unfortunate outcome, but not malpractice. The aneurysm had been severe, the odds already against them. No surgeon could be expected to save every patient. But Adana knew the truth. She had hesitated. She had doubted. And a child had paid the price. She'd returned to work 2 weeks later, performing surgeries with mechanical precision, her hands steady, her focus absolute. But something fundamental had changed. She no longer saw patients, she saw potential failures. Every child on her operating table became Zara's face. Every parent in her waiting room became the woman whose scream still haunted her sleep. Her colleagues noticed. The head of neurosurgery, Dr. Emeka Okonkwo, had called her into his office a month ago, his weathered face creased with concern. "Adana, you're the most talented surgeon I've trained in 30 years, he'd said gently. But you're operating like a machine now. Where's the passion? Where's the instinct that made you brilliant?" She'd stared at him with empty eyes and said nothing. How could she explain that passion had died with Zara? That instinct had betrayed her? That brilliance meant nothing when a child's mother screamed your name in the darkness? So Adana had built walls. She stopped attending hospital social events. She ignored calls from friends who wanted to check in. She sold her vibrant paintings and replaced them with blank white canvases that hurt less to look at. Her penthouse became a monument to emptiness. Expensive furniture no one sat on, a kitchen no one cooked in, a life no one lived in. She told herself it was necessary. Emotional distance meant clearer judgment. Isolation meant focus. Loneliness meant no one else could be hurt by her failures. But late at night, when the city below her windows glittered with a million lives she'd disconnected from, Adana felt the walls closing in. She was becoming exactly what she'd always feared. A brilliant surgeon with perfect hands and a dead heart. That's why she'd answered Liam's call. Not because she was brave, not because she was kind, but because for one moment, hearing that terrified child's voice cut through her isolation, she'd felt something other than guilt. She'd felt needed. And that feeling, however small, had been enough to make her move. The next morning, Adana stood in her bathroom mirror, studying the dark circles under her eyes, the gray threading through her once lustrous black hair. At 38, she looked 50. Success had aged her, grief had broken her, and loneliness had hollowed her out until nothing remained but competence wrapped in designer clothes. She thought about the boy from last night. Liam. The way his intelligent eyes had tracked her every movement, absorbing medical procedures like a sponge. The way he'd handed her tools without being asked, anticipating her needs with uncanny accuracy. The way fear had flashed across his face when she mentioned hospitals, followed immediately by resignation. The look of a child who'd learned that authority meant pain. Something wasn't right in that workshop. She'd seen enough abused children in emergency rooms to recognize the signs. The excessive politeness, the fear of punishment, the way Liam had positioned himself between her and his uncle, even while the man was unconscious. Protective, trained, trapped. Adana pulled out her phone and looked at the photo she'd taken. Liam's face stared back at her, dirt-smudged and exhausted, but somehow still luminous with intelligence. She should delete it. She should forget about the boy and his workshop and return to her sterile, controlled existence where nothing unexpected could hurt her. Instead, she texted the photo to herself with a single word: remember. At the hospital, Adana moved through her morning rounds like a ghost. She checked vitals, reviewed charts, consulted with residents, all while her mind remained trapped in that oil-stained workshop. During a brief break between surgeries, she found herself in the hospital's resource center, accessing the child welfare database she'd used years ago when reporting suspected abuse cases. She entered what little information she had. Liam Okoro, approximately 12 years old, Westbridge District, living with uncle, no mention of parents. The search returned nothing. No school enrollment records, no medical history, no social services files. It was as if Liam didn't officially exist. Adana's pulse quickened. Children didn't simply fall through the cracks of the system. They were pushed. Someone had deliberately kept this boy off the grid, away from schools, away from doctors, away from anyone who might ask questions. Why? She thought about calling Child Protective Services right then, but something stopped her. The system that had failed to notice Liam's existence for 12 years wouldn't suddenly start caring now. She needed more information, more proof, more than a gut feeling and a wrong number phone call. At exactly 4 p.m., Adana told her assistant she was leaving early. She drove back to Westbridge District in daylight this time, seeing details the darkness had hidden. The neighborhood wasn't just poor, it was forgotten. Buildings crumbled slowly under the weight of decades of neglect. Children played in streets littered with trash and broken glass. Women carried water from a single communal pump, their faces carved with exhaustion. This was the Lagos that tourist brochures never showed, that wealthy residents pretended didn't exist, that politicians promised to fix every election year and then abandoned the moment the votes were counted. Adana parked her Mercedes carefully, aware of the eyes tracking her from every window and doorway. Outsiders didn't come here unless they wanted something. And the residents of Westbridge had learned long ago that what outsiders wanted usually made their lives worse. She found the workshop easily in daylight. The sign read Chima's Auto Repair in faded letters. Through the open door, she could hear the sound of tools on metal, rhythmic and precise. She stepped inside and stopped. Liam was alone, crouched over a disassembled car engine, his small hands moving with the confidence of an expert mechanic 3 times his age. He didn't notice her at first, too focused on whatever problem he was solving. Adana watched, transfixed, as this 12-year-old child diagnosed an issue, reached for exactly the right tool, and fixed something she wouldn't have known how to identify, let alone repair. Liam sensed her presence before he saw her. His hands froze mid-motion, wrench suspended over the engine block, and his whole body tensed like a rabbit scenting a predator. Slowly, he turned his head, and when his eyes met Adana's, she saw something flicker across his face. Not fear, but calculation. He was deciding whether to run. "I said I'd come back to check on your uncle," Adana said softly, keeping her voice gentle, her body language open and non-threatening. She'd learned years ago how to approach frightened children in emergency rooms. move slowly, speak quietly, and never, ever block the exits. Liam set down the wrench with careful precision, wiping his oil-stained hands on his shorts. Shorts that were at least 2 sizes too small, frayed at the edges, held up with a piece of rope instead of a belt. "Uncle Chima is sleeping in the back room," he said, his voice flat and emotionless, giving away nothing. "The medicine you gave him worked. The burns look better." He stood up, and Adana noticed how thin he was, his ribs visible through his torn t-shirt, his legs like matchsticks. But his eyes burned with an intelligence that made her breath catch. Adana moved deeper into the workshop, her expensive shoes crunching on metal shavings and broken glass. The space was organized chaos. Engines in various states of disassembly lined one wall. Tools hung on makeshift racks fashioned from scrap metal. And in the corner, she spotted something that made her stop. It was a workspace, but not for car repairs. A scarred wooden table held dozens of electronic devices, phones, radios, circuit boards, all in different stages of repair. Beside them sat a stack of water-damaged books, their pages carefully dried and pressed flat. She moved closer, reading the titles. Advanced Physics for Secondary Schools, Introduction to Electrical Engineering, The Fundamentals of Computer Programming. "You're reading these?" she asked, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. Liam's jaw tightened, defensive. "I taught myself. The library was going to throw them out because of water damage. I saved them." He said it like a challenge, like he expected her to mock him, to tell him that boys like him didn't read books like those. Adana picked up the physics textbook, flipping through pages covered in careful notes written in the margins, questions, observations, calculations worked out in cramped handwriting. "Did you understand it?" she asked. "All of it," Liam said simply. Not bragging, just stating a fact. Adana set down the book carefully, her medical mind shifting into a different kind of diagnostic mode. This wasn't a normal 12-year-old. The repairs around the workshop, the self-taught education, the way he'd anticipated her medical needs last night. This was a child with an exceptional mind being wasted in poverty and neglect. "When was the last time you went to school?" she asked. Something dark passed over Liam's face. 4 years ago, 2nd grade. Uncle Chima said school was useless. Said I'd learn more working here, earning my keep. His voice remained flat, but Adana heard the pain underneath, carefully buried like treasure he didn't dare dig up. "And your parents?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Liam's expression shuddered completely. "Dead. Uncle Chima is all I have." But his eyes slid away when he said it. And Adana's instincts, the same instincts that had made her a brilliant diagnostician before doubt poisoned them, screamed that he was lying. Not about everything, but about something important. Before she could press further, a groan came from the back room. Liam's head snapped toward the sound, his body language shifting instantly from the guarded to alert. Uncle Chima emerged from the back room like a storm cloud taking human form. He was a massive man, easily 6'4", with shoulders broad enough to carry engines and hands scarred from decades of mechanical work. But it was his face that made Adana's blood run cold. Not because it was cruel, but because it was calculating. This was a man who measured everything, including the value of a child's labor. His eyes swept over Adana, taking in her expensive clothes, her designer purse, her obvious wealth. She saw the gears turning behind his bloodshot eyes, saw him assessing whether she was a threat or an opportunity. "You're the doctor from last night," he said, his voice rough as gravel. Liam told me. Said you saved my life. He moved closer, and Adana smelled alcohol on his breath despite the early hour. I appreciate it, but we can't pay you. Whatever you're owed, we don't have it. Adana kept her expression neutral, professional. I'm not here for payment. I came to check your burns, make sure there's no infection. She gestured toward his bandaged hand, which he'd been holding awkwardly against his chest. Chima's eyes narrowed with suspicion. Why? Rich doctors don't make house calls to places like this. What do you really want? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken threats. Adana felt Liam watching her carefully, saw the boy's hands clench into small fists at his sides. He was afraid, not of her, but of what his uncle might do if he perceived her as a threat to their arrangement, whatever that arrangement was. I want to make sure my patient doesn't develop complications that send him to the emergency room, Adana said smoothly, falling back on medical professionalism like armor. Electrical burns can be deceptive. They look better on the surface while causing serious internal damage. I need to examine you properly, run some basic tests. It was true enough to be convincing. Chima studied her for a long moment, then grunted and held out his hand. Fine, but make it quick. We've got work to do. Adana spent the next 15 minutes examining him with clinical detachment, her hands gentle but her mind racing. The burns were healing well. Liam had been changing the dressings correctly, applying the antibiotic ointment she'd left with precise care. But as she worked, she observed everything. The way Chima barked orders at Liam without looking at him. The way Liam jumped to obey with practiced efficiency. The way the boy never spoke unless directly addressed. This wasn't a family. This was exploitation. When she finished the examination, Adana packed her medical bag slowly, buying time to think. She needed to get Liam alone to ask him the questions that would confirm her suspicions. But Chima watched her with hawk eyes, clearly waiting for her to leave. Then Liam spoke up, his voice carefully neutral. Uncle, the carburetor on the Honda is acting strange. I think I know what's wrong, but it's making a sound I've never heard before. Maybe the doctor could listen. She has good ears. It was brilliantly done, respectful, deferential, but engineered to get Adana alone with the engine, away from Chima's direct supervision. The older man waved dismissively. Show her if you want. I need to make phone calls anyway. He disappeared into the back room, and suddenly Adana and Liam were alone among the engines. Liam didn't waste time. He led her to a car on the far side of the workshop, pretending to show her the carburetor while speaking in a low, urgent whisper. You asked about my parents. My mother isn't dead. Uncle Chima lied. She's alive and she's been looking for me for 8 years. Adana's heart stopped. What? Liam's hands trembled as he touched the engine parts, maintaining the pretense of work. I found papers, hidden in Uncle's room, police reports, missing child reports, all filed by someone named Amara Okoro. My mother. She never stopped searching. His voice cracked. He stole me from her, and he's been keeping me here ever since. Using me for free labor, keeping me hidden so she can't find me. The truth hit Adana like a physical blow. This wasn't just exploitation. This was kidnapping. And somewhere in the city, a mother had spent 8 years searching for the son who stood right in front of her, brilliant and broken and trapped. Adana's mind raced through the implications, her medical training battling with maternal instinct she didn't know she possessed. Every fiber of her being screamed to grab Liam's hand and run, to drive him straight to the police station, to reunite him with his mother immediately. But 8 years of captivity had taught Liam survival skills she couldn't ignore. He caught her wrist gently, his oil-stained fingers surprisingly strong. "Not yet," he whispered, his eyes darting toward the back room where Uncle Chima's gruff voice rumbled through a phone call. "If you report this now, he'll disappear. He has connections. Police officers he pays, social workers he bribes. I've heard him on the phone arranging things, making people look the other way." His voice dropped even lower. "I tried to run away twice. Once when I was 7, once when I was 9. Both times the officers who found me brought me straight back to him. They didn't even write reports. They just laughed and said orphans should be grateful for any family that takes them in." The casual cruelty of it made Adana's stomach turn. She'd always known corruption existed in the system, had seen its effects in emergency rooms when abused children were returned to dangerous homes, but she'd never confronted it so directly. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. Liam's eyes met hers, and in that moment, she saw not a frightened child but a strategic mind that had been planning this escape for years, waiting for the right opportunity, the right ally. "The papers are hidden in a metal box under the floorboards in his bedroom. Missing child reports from my mother, forged custody documents giving him guardianship, receipts from bribes he paid to social workers and police. Everything we need to prove what he did." He paused, swallowing hard. "But I can't get to them alone. He watches me too carefully. If he caught me with those papers..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Adana understood perfectly what happened to children who threatened Uncle Chima's profitable arrangement. She thought of her medical oath. First, do no harm. But what was the greater harm? Acting rashly and potentially losing the evidence that could free this boy permanently, or waiting, planning, and ensuring that when they moved, Uncle Chima would have no escape routes left? "When does he leave the workshop?" Adana asked. "Fridays," Liam said immediately. "He collects payment from customers around the district. Gone for at least 3 hours, sometimes 4. He locks me in, but..." A small smile ghosted across his face. "I know how to pick the lock. I've been practicing." They were interrupted by Uncle Chima's heavy footsteps returning from the back room. Instantly, Liam's demeanor shifted. His shoulders hunched, his eyes dropped, his whole presence seemed to shrink into practiced invisibility. The transformation was so complete that Adana felt ice water pour down her spine. This was a survival skill honed by years of abuse, the ability to become nothing, to attract no attention, to present no target for anger or suspicion. Chima barely glanced at them as he moved toward the workshop entrance. "I'm going out to get parts. Liam, you finish that Honda and start on the electrical work for the Volvo. Doctor, you've done your follow-up. Time to go." It wasn't a suggestion. Adana nodded professionally, gathering her medical bag with deliberate slowness. "I'll need to check the burns again in a few days. Electrical damage can develop complications even after apparent healing." Chima's jaw tightened, but he nodded curtly. Refusing follow-up medical care would raise questions he couldn't afford to answer. Not from a doctor with her credentials and connections. As Adana walked toward her Mercedes, she felt Liam's eyes on her back, felt the weight of his desperation and hope pressing against her shoulders like physical hands. She'd made a promise without speaking it aloud. She would come back. She would get those papers. She would find his mother. She would end this. But as she drove away from Westbridge District, watching the workshop shrink in her rearview mirror, doubt crept in like poison. Who was she to save anyone? She was a surgeon who'd let a 7-year-old girl die because she'd hesitated for 3 seconds. She was a woman who'd built walls so high around her heart that she'd forgotten how to feel anything except guilt. She was broken, hollowed out, more damage than the children she thought she could save. What made her think she could navigate corruption, outsmart a criminal, and rescue a kidnapped child when she couldn't even save herself from drowning in her own failures? The questions circled her mind like vultures as she drove back to her penthouse. But when she closed her eyes, she saw Liam's face. Intelligent, desperate, fighting. She saw 8 years of stolen childhood, of brilliant potential locked in a workshop like an engine part waiting to be used. She saw a mother who'd never stopped searching, never stopped hoping, never stopped believing her son was alive somewhere in the city that had swallowed him. Adana opened her eyes and made a decision. Maybe she was broken. Maybe she was damaged beyond repair. But broken tools could still be useful if applied correctly. And if this was her chance at redemption, her opportunity to save one child the way she'd failed to save Zara, then she would take it, even if it destroyed her in the process. The rest of the week passed in careful planning. Adana couldn't risk being seen researching Liam or his mother too openly. She didn't know how far Uncle Chima's network of corruption extended, didn't know which police officers or social workers might report back to him. Instead, she used her position at the hospital to access records indirectly. She started with birth certificates, searching for Liam Okoro, born approximately 12 years ago. She found him. Liam Justice Okoro, born September 15, 2013, to Amara Patience Okoro, father listed as unknown. Hospital records showed a healthy birth, standard vaccinations through age 4, then nothing. The child had vanished from the medical system completely at exactly the age Liam had told her he'd been taken. Next, she searched for Amara Okoro. The results made her breath catch. Dozens of hospital visits over the past 8 years, all stress-related. High blood pressure, anxiety attacks, insomnia, depression. Most recently, 3 emergency room visits in the past 6 months for diabetes-related complications. The woman was literally dying from the stress of losing her son, her body breaking down under the weight of grief and helplessness. Adana printed every document she could access legally, building a file that grew thicker each day. Medical records, birth certificates. The gap in Liam's documentation that coincided exactly with Uncle Chima taking custody. A pattern emerging from the data, clear as an X-ray showing broken bones. On Thursday night, Adana sat in her penthouse surrounded by papers, drinking coffee instead of whiskey for the first time in months. Tomorrow was Friday. Tomorrow, Uncle Chima would leave to collect payments. Tomorrow, she would retrieve the papers Liam had told her about. Tomorrow, everything would change. She thought about calling someone. Dr. Okonkwo, maybe, or a lawyer friend who specialized in family law. But every scenario she played out ended the same way. Well-meaning professionals who would follow proper channels, file proper reports, and alert Uncle Chima through the very system he'd corrupted. She couldn't risk it. Not when Liam's freedom and possibly his life hung in the balance. So she sat alone in her penthouse, surrounded by evidence and plans, and the growing realization that she was about to do something that could cost her everything. Her career, her reputation, possibly her freedom. All for a child she'd met by accident, through a wrong number on a stormy night. She should have been terrified. Instead, for the first time in 6 months, Adana Miles felt alive. The walls she'd built around her heart weren't crumbling. They were being repurposed, reconstructed into armor strong enough to fight for someone who couldn't fight for himself. Tomorrow she would stop being a broken surgeon hiding from her failures. Tomorrow, she would become whatever Liam needed her to be, even if it meant burning down everything she'd built to light his way home. Friday morning arrived wrapped in gray clouds that threatened rain but hadn't yet delivered. Adana stood in her closet, staring at her wardrobe of designer suits and silk blouses, and chose the most forgettable outfit she owned. Dark jeans, a plain black t-shirt, running shoes that could move quickly and quietly. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. No makeup, hair pulled into a simple ponytail, expensive jewelry removed and locked away. She looked ordinary, invisible, exactly what she needed to be. Her phone buzzed with a text from Liam, sent from a number she didn't recognize. He left 10 minutes ago, heading east toward the industrial district. You have time. Adana didn't respond. They'd agreed that communication should be minimal and untraceable. Liam was using a customer's phone, something Uncle Chima wouldn't think to check. She grabbed a canvas bag she'd prepared the night before. Latex gloves, a small flashlight, her phone set to camera mode, and a pocket-sized voice recorder. If she was going to gather evidence, she'd do it properly. Document everything. Leave no room for the corrupt system to dismiss what she found. The drive to Westbridge District felt longer than usual. Every traffic light, a personal enemy. Every slow-moving vehicle, a conspiracy to delay her. Adana's heart pounded against her ribs, her medical training providing unwanted commentary on her elevated heart rate, her shallow breathing, her trembling hands on the steering wheel. She was terrified. But beneath the terror ran a current of something else. Purpose. For 6 months, she'd existed in a fog of guilt and isolation. Now she had a mission, a child to save, a wrong to right. It felt like waking up after a long, nightmarish sleep. She parked 2 blocks away from the workshop, in a spot that couldn't be seen from the main entrance. As she approached on foot, she noticed Liam standing in the doorway, watching for her. The moment their eyes met, he disappeared back inside. Adana counted to 30, long enough to ensure no neighbors were watching too carefully. Then slipped into the workshop. The smell hit her first. Oil, metal, and underneath it all, the faint scent of mold and neglect. Liam stood near the back room entrance, his whole body vibrating with nervous energy. "You're sure he won't come back early?" Adana asked. "I'm not sure of anything," Liam admitted. "But Fridays are his big collection days. He'll hit at least 15 customers before coming back. We have maybe 3 hours." Liam led her into the back room, a space so small and depressing that Adana felt claustrophobia creep up her spine despite the workshop's open floor plan beyond. This was where Liam slept, on a thin mattress on the floor with a single blanket that had more holes than fabric. No windows, no ventilation except what came through the workshop. No books, no toys, nothing that acknowledged a child lived here. Just a sleeping space for a tool that needed minimal maintenance. Uncle Chima's bedroom was separated by a thin plywood partition. Liam moved to the far corner, his practiced hands finding the loose floorboard immediately. "I discovered this by accident 2 years ago," he whispered. "I was cleaning and heard the board creak differently. When I pulled it up, I found the box." He demonstrated, lifting the floorboard with careful precision, revealing a shallow space underneath. Inside sat a metal box, the kind used for important documents, locked with a simple combination padlock. Adana's heart sank. "You didn't mention it was locked." Liam's response was to pull a bent paperclip from his pocket and smile slightly. "I've had 2 years to practice picking it. It takes me about 45 seconds now." He was right. His fingers worked the paperclip with the same precision she'd seen him apply to engine repairs, feeling for the tumblers, manipulating them with practiced confidence. The lock clicked open. Time seemed to stop. Inside the metal box lay 8 years of carefully documented crime. Adana pulled on her latex gloves and began removing papers with shaking hands, photographing each one with her phone while the voice recorder captured her verbal documentation. Missing child. Report filed by Amara Patience Okoro, dated November 3, 2017. Child described as Liam Justice Okoro, age 4 years, 3 months. Last seen at Cornerstone Daycare Center, Lekki, Phase 1. Her voice remained steady through sheer force of will. More papers emerged, each one a damning piece of evidence. Forged custody documents claiming Uncle Chima was Liam's legal guardian. Receipts showing cash payments to social workers named Blessing Adeyemi and Tunde Okafor. Bribes to keep Liam out of the system. Bank statements showing regular deposits from customers who'd been told their car repairs cost more than they actually did. The difference pocketed as profit made possible by Liam's unpaid labor. But the most damning evidence came in a series of letters. Actual handwritten letters. From Amara to the police department, to social services, to anyone who would listen. 8 years of desperate pleas. 8 years of a mother begging someone, anyone, to find her missing son. Each letter more heartbroken than the last, her handwriting deteriorating from neat and hopeful to barely legible and desperate. Adana read them with tears streaming down her face, photographing each one while her heart shattered. Dear Lagos State Police Department, this is my 73rd letter requesting help finding my son. Liam, Adana whispered, looking up from the letters to find the boy watching her with dry eyes. Your mother never stopped looking, never stopped fighting. Do you understand what that means? Liam nodded slowly, but his expression remained guarded, protected by walls built from 8 years of disappointment. I understand she tried. I also understand she failed. Uncle Chima told me she didn't want me anymore, that she gave me away because she couldn't afford to keep me. I stopped believing that 5 years ago, but... His voice cracked slightly. But knowing she looked and knowing she never found me is almost worse than thinking she didn't care. Adana wanted to gather him into her arms, to comfort him the way she'd comforted countless frightened children in emergency rooms. But Liam held himself rigid, untouchable, and she respected that boundary. Instead, she returned to documenting the evidence, working quickly now, aware that time was passing and Uncle Chima could return at any moment. The last item in the box stopped her cold. It was a hospital bracelet, tiny and faded, with the name Baby Okoro printed on it. Liam's birth bracelet, taken from the hospital when he was born, kept by Uncle Chima as proof of identity or maybe as a trophy. She photographed it carefully, then looked at Liam. We need to take the originals, all of them. Photographs won't be enough if the police or social workers are corrupt. We need the physical evidence. Liam shook his head violently. If he finds the box empty, he'll know immediately. He'll run. He has money hidden, contacts in other states. We'll never find him again. And without him, how do we prove any of this actually happened? A box of papers could be forged. He was right, and Adana hated it. They needed Uncle Chima to stay put, confident and unsuspecting. While they built an airtight case, taking the papers would alert him too soon. But leaving them felt like leaving Liam in danger. What if we photograph everything, put the originals back, and I take one thing he won't notice is missing? Adana asked. Something small but significant that can't be forged or duplicated. Liam thought for a moment, then reached into the box and pulled out a single envelope. This. It's the original missing child report filed by my mother. Uncle Chima keeps it because it has official police stamps. Proof he needed to forge the custody documents. but he only looks at the forged papers, never the original report. He won't notice it's gone unless he's specifically checking for it. Adana slipped the envelope into her bag, then helped Liam carefully replace everything else exactly as they'd found it. They worked in silence. Two people united by a common purpose, moving like surgeons performing a delicate operation where one wrong move could be fatal. Just as Liam clicked the padlock back into place and replaced the floorboard, they heard the sound that made both their hearts stop. The workshop's metal door screeching open. Uncle Chima's voice boomed across the space. "Liam, where are you, boy? I forgot the invoice folder." They had perhaps 30 seconds before he reached the back room. 30 seconds to hide any evidence of what they'd been doing. 30 seconds to save themselves. Liam moved with the practiced speed of someone who'd learned to hide many things in his 8 years of captivity. He grabbed Adana's hand and pulled her toward the tiny bathroom attached to the back room. A space barely large enough for one person, filthy and reeking of mildew. They pressed into the cramped space together, Adana's back against the cracked sink, Liam frozen against her, both barely breathing. Through the thin walls, they heard Uncle Chima enter the back room, his heavy footsteps making the floor vibrate. Heard him rummage through papers on the makeshift desk, heard him mutter to himself about incompetent customers and missing invoices, heard him move closer to the bathroom door. Adana's hand found Liam's shoulder, her fingers gentle on his trembling frame. In that moment, crouched in a filthy bathroom hiding from a criminal, she felt something shift inside her. The walls she'd built weren't just for protection anymore. They were weapons. And she would use every bit of her strength, intelligence, and resources to tear down the walls that kept Liam imprisoned. Uncle Chima's footsteps retreated. The workshop door screeched shut. They waited 5 full minutes before emerging, both shaking, both aware of how close they'd come to disaster. "Go," Liam whispered urgently, "before he comes back again. You have what you need. Now find my mother and bring her home to me." Adana looked at this brave, brilliant child who'd survived 8 years of exploitation and emerged with his humanity intact. "I will find her," she promised. "And when I do, the 3 of us will end this together." She didn't know if it was a promise she could keep, but she meant every word. Amara Patience Okoro lived in a one-room apartment in Surulere, in a building so old its walls had given up trying to keep out the rain. Adana stood outside the address she'd traced through hospital records, her hand raised to knock, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. What would she say? How did you tell a mother who'd spent 8 years searching that you'd found her son? That he was alive and brilliant and broken? That he'd been stolen and exploited less than 15 miles from where she'd been searching? How did you explain that the system had failed her 73 times? That her letters had been ignored? That corruption had kept her son trapped while she slowly died from grief? Adana knocked anyway. The woman who answered the door looked nothing like the vibrant young mother from Liam's birth certificate photo. Amara was 31, but could have passed for 50. Her hair, pulled back in a tired bun, showed streaks of premature gray. Her face, once round and warm, had been carved hollow by stress and malnutrition. But her eyes held the same intelligent fire Adana had seen in Liam's face. The same refusal to surrender, even when surrender would have been easier. "Yes?" Amara's voice was hoarse, cautious. Women in neighborhoods like this learned not to trust strangers at their doors. "My name is Dr. Adana Miles," she began, her prepared speech evaporating in the face of Amara's exhausted hope. "I'm a neurosurgeon at Lagos Central Hospital, and I need to talk to you about your son, Liam." The change in Amara was instantaneous and heartbreaking. Her whole body went rigid, her hand clutching the doorframe so hard, her knuckles turned white. "Is he dead?" she whispered. "Did you find his body? Is that why you're here?" "No," Adana said quickly, her medical training kicking in, assessing Amara's elevated heart rate, her shallow breathing, the way her legs seemed barely able to support her weight. "No, he's alive. He's alive and safe, and he wants to see you." Amara's legs gave out. Adana caught her before she hit the floor, her arms strong from years of supporting patients, her voice steady and calm as she helped the trembling woman to the single chair in the tiny apartment. "Breathe, Amara. Slow, deep breaths. That's it. In through your nose, out through your mouth. He's alive. Your son is alive." For several minutes, Amara couldn't speak. She just sat shaking, tears streaming down her face, her hands pressed against her chest as if trying to hold her breaking heart together. Adana knelt beside her, one hand on her shoulder, waiting until the initial shock passed and Amara could hear her properly. When Amara finally looked up, her eyes held a mixture of joy and fury that Adana had never seen before. "Where is he? Where has he been? Who took him?" The questions came rapid fire, 8 years of desperate searching condensed into 3 sentences. Adana took a deep breath and told her everything. About the wrong number call on a stormy night. About finding Liam in the workshop with Uncle Chima. About the boy's brilliant mind trapped in exploitation. About the metal box and the evidence of corruption and the 73 letters that had been ignored. She told it all clearly, clinically, the way she delivered difficult diagnoses to families in hospital waiting rooms. Amara listened without interrupting, her face cycling through emotions so quickly, Adana couldn't track them all. Relief, rage, grief, determination. When Adana finished, Amara stood up, her previous weakness replaced by steel-hard resolve. "Take me to him. Right now. I don't care about evidence or police or proper procedures. Take me to my son." Adana had expected this. "I will. But first, you need to hear the difficult part." She pulled out her phone and showed Amara the photographs of the corrupted police reports, the forged custody documents, the receipts showing bribes paid to social workers. "Uncle Chima has connections throughout the system. If we move too quickly, he'll disappear, and we'll never be able to prosecute him. Worse, without airtight evidence, his corrupt contacts might claim you abandoned Liam and that Chima was providing legitimate care." The suggestion made Amara's face twist with such pain that Adana wanted to take it back, to promise they'd storm the workshop immediately and damn the consequences. But she'd learned in her surgical career that sometimes you had to cause pain to prevent greater damage, had to cut deep to remove the cancer completely. "I would never abandon my baby," Amara said, her voice breaking. "Never. I worked 3 jobs to afford that daycare. I kissed him goodbye at 7:30 a.m. on November 3rd, 2017. And when I came to pick him up at 5:00 p.m., they told me a man claiming to be his uncle had collected him at noon, said there was a family emergency. By the time I realized it was a lie. By the time I got to the police." She covered her face with her hands. "They didn't believe me. Said I was probably a negligent mother trying to cover up my own mistakes. Said children don't just disappear from legitimate daycare centers. Said I should check with family members. That he probably just went home with a relative." Adana felt rage building in her chest, hot and righteous. The system hadn't just failed Amara. It had actively worked against her, had dismissed her, doubted her, blamed her while her son was being exploited 15 miles away. "The daycare center?" Adana said suddenly. "Do you have any documentation from them? Enrollment papers, payment receipts, anything showing Liam was officially in their care when he was taken. Amara moved to a cardboard box in the corner of her tiny apartment, the only furniture besides the chair and a thin mattress on the floor. She pulled out a plastic folder, its contents organized with obsessive care. Inside were copies of everything: daycare enrollment forms, payment receipts, her missing child report, copies of the 73 letters she'd sent, medical records showing Liam's vaccinations and checkups, even his baby photos. "I kept everything," she said quietly. "Every piece of evidence that proved he existed, that proved I was his mother, that proved I never stopped looking. Because I knew someday, somehow, I'd find him. And when I did, I needed to be able to prove he was mine." Adana took the folder with reverent care, understanding what it represented. 8 years of hope maintained through systematic documentation. A mother's love expressed through organized files and carefully preserved receipts. Combined with the evidence from Uncle Chima's metal box, they had enough to build an airtight case. But they needed one more thing. "We need a lawyer," Adana said. "Someone outside the corrupted system. Someone with enough influence that the police can't ignore or intimidate them." She pulled out her phone and made a call she'd been avoiding for 6 months. "Dr. Okonkwo, it's Adana. I need your help with something outside the hospital, something important." She explained the situation in broad strokes, leaving out the details of how she'd obtained evidence. Dr. Emeka Okonkwo had been practicing medicine in Lagos for 35 years, and in that time, he'd built a network of contacts that spanned every level of society. He listened to Adana's explanation without interrupting, and when she finished, his response was immediate. "My daughter is a family law attorney, specializes in cases involving corrupt social services. She's made enemies in the system, but she's never lost a custody case where she had solid evidence." He paused. "Adana, are you sure about this? If Uncle Chima has the connections you describe, going after him could put you in danger." Adana looked at Amara, who was clutching her folder of evidence like a life preserver, her eyes fixed on Adana with desperate hope. She thought about Liam, hiding his intelligence behind practiced invisibility, picking locks with paper clips and teaching himself physics from water-damaged books. She thought about Zara, the 7-year-old girl she'd failed to save, whose death had broken her so completely, she'd stopped trying to save anyone, including herself. "I'm sure," Adana said. "For the first time in 6 months, I'm absolutely sure." Within 2 hours, they were sitting in a small law office in Victoria Island, surrounded by case files and legal texts. Dr. Okonkwo's daughter, Chisom, was a sharp-eyed woman in her early 30s who radiated competence and controlled fury as she reviewed the evidence. "This is one of the worst cases of systemic corruption I've seen," Chisom said, her voice tight with anger. "And I've seen a lot." She spread the documents across her desk, Amara's missing child reports next to Uncle Chima's forged custody papers, the receipts for bribes next to Amara's 73 ignored letters, Liam's medical records showing care through age 4 next to 8 years of total absence from the system. "Here's what we're going to do," Chisom said, her legal mind already constructing a strategy. "First, we file an emergency custody petition directly with the family court, bypassing the local police entirely. We'll include all this evidence, plus sworn affidavits from both of you detailing exactly what happened." She looked at Amara. "You'll need to describe the day Liam was taken, every detail you remember. The judge will want to see that your story is consistent, specific, and supported by the documentation." Then she turned to Adana. "You'll need to explain how you came into contact with Liam, what you observed of his living conditions, and your professional medical opinion about his physical and mental state. Can you do that without revealing exactly how you obtained evidence from Uncle Chima's residence? Adana nodded. I can say I observed the workshop environment during medical follow-up visits. That Liam exhibited signs of exploitation and neglect. That I became concerned for his welfare and began investigating. All true, just strategically incomplete. Chisholm smiled grimly. Good. Strategic truth is the foundation of effective legal work. The next step was harder. They needed to move against Uncle Chima before he realized they had evidence. But they also needed to ensure Liam's safety during the legal process. If Uncle Chima suspected anything, he might hurt Liam or disappear with the boy before the authorities could intervene. We filed the petition Monday morning, Chisholm decided. That gives us the weekend to prepare affidavits and gather any additional evidence. The moment the petition is filed, the court will issue an emergency custody order. We'll have police, federal police, not the corrupt local officers, escort us to retrieve Liam from the workshop. She looked at Amara with gentle firmness. You need to understand that even with all this evidence, the process takes time. The court will want psychological evaluations, interviews with Liam, verification of all our documentation. It could be weeks before you're officially granted full custody again. Amara's voice was steel-wrapped in silk. I've waited 8 years. I can wait a few more weeks, as long as I know he's safe. As long as I know he knows I never stopped looking. Adana felt something break open in her chest. Some dam that had been holding back 8 years of Amara's grief and 6 months of her own. 2 women, broken by different tragedies, united by their determination to save one brilliant, stolen child. They worked through the night, preparing documents, recording affidavits, building a legal case so airtight that no amount of corruption could break it. And for the first time since Zara's death, Adana felt like she was performing surgery again. Cutting away cancer, removing disease, saving a life. Only this time, the operation was taking place in a law office instead of an operating room, and the scalpels were legal documents instead of surgical instruments. But the purpose was the same: to heal what had been broken, to restore what had been stolen, to prove that sometimes, even in a system designed to fail the vulnerable, 2 determined women could fight back and win. Saturday morning found Adana sitting in her penthouse, surrounded by legal documents and medical files, her coffee growing cold as she prepared her official affidavit. The words had to be precise, clinical, unassailable. She couldn't let emotion bleed into her professional assessment, couldn't give Uncle Chima's lawyers any ammunition to discredit her testimony. But how did you describe the systematic exploitation of a brilliant child without letting rage color every sentence? She wrote and rewrote the opening paragraph 7 times before finding language that satisfied both her medical ethics and Chisholm's legal requirements. On the night of November 29, 2025, I received an emergency call from a minor child requesting medical assistance for an adult male suffering from electrical shock injuries. Upon arriving at the location, I observed living conditions consistent with child neglect and labor exploitation. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She almost ignored it, then saw the message. It's me. Borrowed customer phone again. Uncle asking questions about Friday. Says workshop smelled different. Did we leave something? Adana's blood ran cold. They'd been so careful replacing everything exactly as they'd found it. But Uncle Chima had survived 8 years of criminal activity by being paranoid and observant. If he suspected something was wrong, he might run before they could file the custody petition. She texted back quickly. What kind of questions? Is he suspicious of you specifically? The response came after a long, terrifying pause. Not sure. He keeps staring at me like he's trying to figure something out. Asked me if anyone came to the workshop Friday. I said no. Don't think he believed me. Adana forwarded the exchange to Chisholm immediately, then called Amara. We might have a problem. Uncle Chima is suspicious. We may need to move faster than Monday. Amara's voice was calm in a way that spoke of 8 years spent preparing for every possible scenario. How fast? Can we file today? Tomorrow? Courts are closed weekends, Adana said, hating the weakness in the system that put Liam at risk. But Chisholm might be able to get an emergency judge to sign an order if we can demonstrate immediate danger. She paused, thinking through the implications. The problem is proving immediate danger without revealing that we've been gathering evidence. If we tip our hand too early, Uncle Chima runs. If we wait too long, he might hurt Liam or disappear with him. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long, Adana thought the connection had dropped. Then Amara spoke, her voice carrying a weight of decision that came from 8 years of impossible choices. What if I went to the workshop? Right now? Openly? What if I confronted him directly? Told him I know he has my son? Demanded to see Liam? The suggestion was simultaneously brilliant and terrifying. He could panic, Adana warned. Could hurt you, could hurt Liam, could run immediately. Or he could think I'm just another desperate mother making wild accusations, Amara countered. He's dealt with my letters for 8 years. He knows the system dismissed me every time. He might think he's untouchable, that I have no proof. That I'm still just the negligent mother the police refuse to believe. She paused. And while he's focused on me, while he's explaining why I'm crazy and mistaken, you and the lawyer can be getting that emergency court order. Adana's surgical mind ran through the scenario like a complex operation, identifying risks and benefits. The risk? Uncle Chima could react violently, could disappear with Liam, could destroy evidence. The benefit? They'd force his hand before he had time to plan. Would get Liam and Amara in the same room. Would create a confrontation that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. We'd need backup, Adana said slowly, the plan taking shape. Police we can trust, or at least witnesses he can't intimidate or bribe. Dr. Okonkwo, Amara suggested immediately. He's respected, connected, impossible to bribe. If he witnesses the confrontation, Uncle Chima can't make it disappear. Adana thought about her mentor, the man who'd trained her, who'd tried to help her through her grief, who'd immediately mobilized his daughter when Adana asked for help. He would do it, but we'd be putting him at risk too. They called Chisholm next, explaining Amara's plan. The lawyer's response was immediate and firm. Absolutely not. This is insane. We have a solid legal case. We file Monday, get the court order, retrieve Liam with proper police escort. That's how the system is supposed to work. The system failed me for 8 years, Amara said quietly. Forgive me if I don't trust it to work now when my son's safety is at stake. Chisholm sighed, and Adana heard the sound of someone who'd seen too many cases where following proper procedure had led to tragic outcomes. If we do this, and I'm not saying we should, we need everything documented. Video recording, multiple witnesses, someone monitoring the situation ready to call federal police if things escalate. She paused. And we need to accept that this could destroy our legal case if it goes wrong. A judge could view it as provocation, as harassment, as evidence that Amara is unstable, rather than Uncle Chima being criminal. I don't care about the legal case if my son gets hurt waiting for it, Amara said. I care about getting him out of that workshop alive. Everything else is secondary. Adana understood completely. This was the same calculation she made in emergency surgeries. Sometimes you had to take a dangerous action now to prevent certain death later. Sometimes the risky choice was actually the safest option available. "I'll call Dr. Okonkwo," Adana said. "Chisholm, you prepare emergency custody documents anyway, in case we need to file them immediately after the confrontation. Amara, you and I are going to that workshop in 2 hours. We're going to face Uncle Chima together, and we're going to bring Liam home." 2 hours later, Adana stood outside the workshop with an unlikely team assembled around her. Dr. Okonkwo, her mentor, carrying the gravitas of 35 years in medicine. Chisholm, armed with legal documents and a voice recorder. Amara, trembling but determined, clutching the plastic folder that contained 8 years of evidence. And Adana herself, no longer the broken surgeon hiding from failure, but a woman who'd found purpose in fighting for someone who couldn't fight alone. "Last chance to back out," Chisholm said. "We can still file Monday. Do this the proper way." Amara shook her head. "I've been doing things the proper way for 8 years. It's time to try something different." She walked toward the workshop entrance, and the others followed. Inside, they found Uncle Chima bent over an engine, his massive hands covered in grease. Liam was across the workshop, organizing tools with practiced efficiency. The moment Liam saw his mother, his whole body went rigid. Adana saw his eyes go wide, saw his mouth open in shock, or maybe hope, or maybe terror. Uncle Chima looked up at the sound of footsteps, and his face cycled through confusion, recognition, and calculation in the space of 3 seconds. "Can I help you people?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral, his eyes already identifying the threat level of each person in front of him. Amara stepped forward, and her voice when she spoke was steady as steel. "My name is Amara Patience Okoro. 8 years ago, you kidnapped my 4-year-old son from his daycare center. His name is Liam Justice Okoro, and I want him back." The workshop fell into absolute silence. Uncle Chima's face went blank. The practiced blankness of someone who'd told lies so many times they'd become a reflex. "I don't know what you're talking about. Liam is my nephew. His mother died when he was young. I've been raising him ever since." "That's a lie," Amara said, her voice growing stronger. "I filed 73 missing child reports. I sent letters to every police station, every social services office, every government agency I could find. I never stopped looking for my son. And now, I've found him." Uncle Chima's eyes narrowed, and Adana saw him calculating, trying to determine how much they knew, how much they could prove. "You're confused. Maybe you lost a child, and that's tragic. But Liam isn't him. You need to leave my property." "Show me the custody documents." Chisholm stepped forward, her lawyer voice cutting through the tension. "If Liam is legally your nephew, you'll have official custody papers. Show us those papers, and we'll leave immediately." The demand hung in the air. Uncle Chima's hesitation lasted only a moment, but it was enough. Everyone in that workshop saw it. The flicker of panic, the brief moment where he considered running, the calculation of whether he could bluff his way through this confrontation. Then Liam spoke for the first time, his young voice cutting through the adult tension like a knife. "Mom, just one word, just one question. But the weight of 8 years of stolen childhood, 8 years of wondering if she'd truly abandoned him, 8 years of hidden hope crashed into that single syllable." Amara's face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Baby. Oh, my baby. Yes, it's me. I never stopped looking, never stopped loving you, never stopped fighting to find you. Uncle Chima moved then, fast for a big man, positioning himself between Liam and Amara. You need to leave, now, before I call the police and have you arrested for harassment. Please do call them, Dr. Okonkwo said quietly, speaking for the first time. His voice carried the authority of decades of respect, of a man who'd delivered difficult truths to powerful people and never flinched. I'd very much like to explain to the authorities why a 12-year-old child has no school enrollment records, no medical history for 8 years, and is being used for labor in violation of child welfare laws. Uncle Chima's confident mask cracked completely. Who the hell are you people? You can't just walk in here making accusations. We're the people who have evidence, Adana interrupted, finding her voice, finding her strength. We have the forged custody documents. We have the receipts for bribes. We have the missing child reports that were ignored. We have everything, Mr. Chima. And on Monday morning, we're filing an emergency custody petition that will end your exploitation of this child. The confrontation that followed happened fast and chaotic. Uncle Chima lunged toward Liam, whether to grab him or hurt him or use him as leverage. Adana never knew. Because Liam moved faster, his 12 years of survival instincts kicking in. He ducked under Uncle Chima's reaching arm and ran straight to his mother. Amara caught him, wrapped her arms around him for the first time in 8 years, and collapsed to her knees, sobbing into his hair while Liam clung to her with desperate strength. Uncle Chima froze, seeing his leverage disappear, seeing 8 years of profitable exploitation crumbling around him. He could run. He could fight. He could try to talk his way out. But with 5 witnesses, video recording, and a mother who'd never stopped searching now reunited with her son, his options had run out. We're leaving, Amara said, standing up with Liam still in her arms despite the fact that he was nearly as tall as she was. We're walking out of here right now. And if you try to stop us, if you try to hurt my son, these witnesses will ensure you spend the rest of your life in prison. Uncle Chima's face twisted with rage and desperation. You can't prove anything. Those papers could be forged. That child could be anyone. I have lawyers. I have connections. You're nobody. Just a poor woman with delusions and a doctor who thinks she can play hero. Adana smiled, and it was the coldest smile she'd ever worn. You're right. I am playing hero. And you know what? I'm discovering I'm quite good at it. They didn't go to Amara's tiny apartment. They went to Adana's penthouse, where there was space and safety and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over a city that had failed Liam for 8 years. Chisholm had already filed emergency documentation with an on-call family court judge, and federal police were en route to secure the workshop and arrest Uncle Chima before he could destroy evidence or flee. But for now, in this moment, Adana's home became a temporary sanctuary where a mother and son could begin the impossible process of rebuilding 8 years of stolen time. Liam sat on Adana's expensive leather couch, looking tiny and overwhelmed in the vast space. He'd barely spoken since leaving the workshop, his eyes darting around the penthouse like he couldn't quite believe it was real. Amara sat beside him, one hand constantly touching him, his shoulder, his hand, his hair, as if reassuring herself he was truly there, truly real, truly alive. Dr. Okonkwo had gone with the police to oversee Uncle Chima's arrest and evidence collection. Chisholm was on her phone coordinating legal details, and Adana stood in her kitchen making tea, giving mother and son space while remaining close enough to help if needed. She understood from years of emergency medicine that trauma couldn't be rushed. Healing happened in its own time, following its own path. Sometimes the best thing a doctor could do was simply be present and ready. I thought you didn't want me anymore, Liam said suddenly, his voice small and broken in a way it hadn't been even during his worst moments in the workshop. Uncle Chima said you gave me away because you couldn't afford to keep me. He said you signed papers. He showed me documents with your signature. Amara made a sound like a wounded animal. No. Oh, baby, no. I never signed anything. I never gave you away. Those documents were forged. She pulled out her plastic folder, hands shaking as she showed Liam the missing child reports, the letters, the evidence of 8 years of desperate searching. Look, every one of these is dated. Every one shows I never stopped looking. I filed reports every month for 8 years. I sent letters to everyone I could think of. I spent every spare moment searching, calling, begging anyone who would listen to help me find you. Liam touched the papers with trembling fingers, reading dates and details, his brilliant mind processing information at lightning speed. Adana watched from the kitchen as understanding dawned across his face. Not just intellectual understanding, but emotional comprehension of what his mother had endured, how she'd never surrendered, how she'd fought an entire corrupted system alone for 8 years and never gave up. Why didn't they help you? He asked, his voice breaking on the question. Why didn't anyone believe you? Amara's answer was painful in its honesty. Because I was poor. Because I was a single mother. Because I worked 3 jobs and could barely afford rent, let alone lawyers. Because the daycare center where you were taken shut down a week after you disappeared. The owners claiming bankruptcy, and all their records conveniently disappeared with them. She took a shaky breath. Because the police officers I reported to were the same ones Uncle Chima was bribing. Because social workers who could have helped were paid to look the other way. Because the system is designed to protect people with money and power. And I had neither. The raw truth of it hung in the air. Liam processed it with the same intensity he'd applied to learning physics from water-damaged books, his young mind grappling with the systemic injustice that had stolen his childhood. I could have escaped earlier, he said quietly. I learned to pick locks when I was 10. I could have run away, but I had nowhere to go, no one to run to. I didn't even know where to start looking for you. Adana felt her heart shatter. This brilliant child had developed escape skills years ago, but had remained trapped because he'd believed the lie that no one wanted him, that he was unwanted and alone. You're not alone anymore, Amara said fiercely. Never again. I don't care if I have to work 5 jobs. I don't care if we live in a cardboard box. You're my son, and we're staying together from now on. Chisholm hung up her phone and joined them in the living room, her expression carefully neutral in the way of lawyers delivering complicated news. Uncle Chima has been arrested. Federal police found the metal box exactly where you described, Liam. They're processing the evidence now. She paused. He's already trying to cut a deal, naming other people involved in the corruption network. The social workers who took bribes, the police officers who ignored reports, even the daycare owners who facilitated the kidnapping. Adana felt a savage satisfaction. Uncle Chima had built his criminal enterprise on connections and corruption. Now those same connections would turn on him, each one trying to save themselves by providing evidence against the others. What happens now? Amara asked, her arm still wrapped protectively around Liam. The emergency custody hearing is scheduled for Monday morning, Chisholm explained. Given the evidence and Uncle Chima's arrest, it's almost certain the judge will grant you temporary custody immediately. Then we'll proceed to formal hearings, psychological evaluations for Liam, verification of all documentation. She looked at Liam directly. You'll have to tell your story to a lot of people over the next few weeks. Judges, social workers, possibly therapists. It won't be easy. Liam's response was immediate and firm. I can do it. I've survived 8 years in that workshop. I can survive talking about it. His voice carried a strength that belied his 12 years, a resilience forged in exploitation and hardship. I want Uncle Chima and everyone who helped him to pay for what they did. I want to make sure no other child goes through what I went through. The words hung in the air with the weight of purpose, of a brilliant mind that had survived trauma finding meaning in justice. Adana recognized it. She'd felt the same shift in herself over the past week, moving from broken survivor to active fighter. You'll need counseling, Adana said gently, moving from the kitchen to sit across from Liam and Amara. Not because you're weak or damaged, but because trauma leaves marks even on the strongest people. I know. I've been hiding from my own trauma for 6 months. She told them then, briefly, about Zara, about the surgery that failed, about the mother's scream that still haunted her, about building walls so high that nothing could hurt her, and how those walls had also kept out everything good and meaningful in her life. Meeting you changed that, she said to Liam. Your wrong number call on a stormy night reminded me why I became a doctor in the first place. Not to be perfect, not to never fail, but to fight for people who need someone in their corner. She smiled, feeling tears on her face. So thank you for calling the wrong number, for trusting a stranger, for letting me help save you so that maybe, in the process, I could save myself too. The silence that followed was broken by Liam's question, asked with the directness of a child who'd learned to see through pretense. Can I hug you? Adana nodded, not trusting her voice. Liam crossed the space between them and wrapped his thin arms around her, and Adana felt 8 years of his stolen childhood and 6 months of her own grief meeting in that embrace. 2 broken people, finding healing and helping each other. The rest of the evening passed in careful conversation and quiet moments. Chisholm left to prepare additional legal documents. Dr. Okonkwo called to report that the police investigation was expanding, that Uncle Chima's arrest had exposed a network of corruption larger than anyone had suspected. Amara and Liam talked in quiet voices, filling in 8 years of blank space with stories and memories and apologies that didn't need to be spoken, but were anyway. And Adana watched them. This mother and son rebuilding their relationship one careful word at a time, and felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not naive hope that everything would be perfect, but realistic hope that broken things could be repaired, that stolen time could be honored, if not recovered, that justice might occasionally win against corruption. Around midnight, Amara carried a sleeping Liam to Adana's guest room. The first time he'd slept in a real bed in 8 years. She tucked him in with gentle hands, kissing his forehead with 8 years of stored-up love. Then she returned to the living room, where Adana sat with 2 cups of tea growing cold. I don't know how to thank you, Amara said, her voice thick with emotion. You didn't have to help us. You had no reason to get involved. But you did anyway. And you saved my son. Adana shook her head. I think your son saved me. I was drowning in guilt and isolation. His call pulled me back to life. She paused, considering her next words carefully. When this is over, after the custody hearings, after the legal process, Liam will need educational support. He's brilliant, but he's missed 8 years of formal schooling. Amara's expression hardened with defensive pride. I'll find a way. I'll work extra jobs. I'll apply for scholarships. What if you didn't have to? Adana interrupted gently. What if I helped? Not charity, investment. I've watched Liam solve complex mechanical and electrical problems that would stump trained engineers. I've seen his self-taught education, his hunger to learn. That kind of intelligence deserves support. She took a breath. Let me help pay for his education. Let me connect him with mentors in engineering and science. Let me use my resources and connections to give him opportunities he's earned through sheer brilliance and determination. Amara's eyes filled with tears. Why would you do that? You barely know us. Because 6 months ago, I let a 7-year-old girl die on my operating table, Adana said quietly. I can't change that. I can't bring her back. But I can help ensure that another brilliant child doesn't have their potential stolen by poverty and circumstance. I can take all this guilt and grief I've been carrying and transform it into something meaningful. She met Amara's eyes. Let me help your son become everything he's capable of being. Not to ease my conscience, but because he deserves it. Because you both deserve it. Because sometimes the universe gives us a second chance to get things right. And I'm not going to waste mine. They talked deep into the night, making plans and dreaming futures. Adana learned about Amara's life. The 3 jobs, the medical issues, the diabetes she couldn't afford to properly treat, the apartment she could barely afford that was falling apart around her. Amara learned about Adana's journey. Medical school on scholarship, the climb to the top of her field, the success that had felt hollow until a wrong number call reminded her what mattered. 2 women from completely different worlds, brought together by a 12-year-old genius in a stormy night. By the time they finally left, Amara on the couch, refusing Adana's offer of the second guest room because she wanted to be close enough to hear Liam if he woke, the sky beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows was beginning to lighten with pre-dawn gray. Adana lay in her own bed, staring at the ceiling, and for the first time in 6 months, felt like she could breathe. The walls she'd built were coming down, not all at once, not easily. But brick by brick, she was dismantling the isolation she'd constructed and building something new in its place. Connection, purpose, redemption. Tomorrow would bring legal battles and bureaucratic challenges and the hard work of helping Liam and Amara rebuild their lives. But tonight, in this moment, they were safe. Together. Healing. And that was enough. The Lagos family court courtroom on Monday morning was smaller than Adana had imagined, with fluorescent lights that flickered occasionally and wooden benches worn smooth by decades of desperate people seeking justice. Judge Folasade Adegoke presided from a raised bench, her graying hair pulled back in a severe bun, her dark eyes missing nothing as she reviewed the emergency custody petition before her. Amara sat at the petitioner's table with Chisholm beside her, wearing a borrowed suit that Adana had provided. Her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Liam sat between Amara and Adana in the gallery, his thin frame rigid with tension, his intelligent eyes tracking every movement in the courtroom. Across the aisle sat Uncle Chima's hastily assembled legal team, 2 lawyers in expensive suits who'd been hired by someone, though who was paying them remained unclear. Uncle Chima himself sat in orange prison jumpsuit and handcuffs, his massive frame somehow diminished by the reality of his arrest. His confident mask replaced by barely controlled rage. Judge Adegoke looked up from the documents, her expression unreadable. This is an emergency custody petition filed by Amara Patience Okoro, seeking immediate return of her minor child, Liam Justice Okoro, aged 12 years, currently in the unauthorized custody of Chima Okafor. Her voice was crisp, professional, giving away nothing. Ms. Okafor, you claim your son was kidnapped 8 years ago and that you've been searching for him since. Is that correct?" Amara stood, her voice shaking but clear. "Yes, Your Honor. On November 3rd, 2017, my 4-year-old son was taken from his daycare center by a man claiming to be his uncle and reporting a family emergency. I filed a missing child report that same day. I've filed 73 follow-up reports over the past 8 years. I never stopped searching. I never stopped hoping." She gestured toward the stack of evidence on the table. "All of my reports, all of my letters, all of my documentation is right here. I can prove I never abandoned my son, never stopped fighting to find him." Judge Adegoke's eyes narrowed slightly. 73 reports over 8 years, and the child was never located? That seems unusual. It was the opening Uncle Chima's lawyers had been waiting for. The lead attorney, a sharp-faced man named ADEMOYE, stood smoothly. "Your Honor, my client has been caring for this child for 8 years under the belief that he was providing a home for his orphaned nephew. The documents he was provided indicated that the mother had voluntarily surrendered custody due to financial hardship. My client had no reason to believe those documents were forged," Chisholm interrupted, standing as well. "Your Honor, we have evidence that Mr. Okafor paid bribes to social workers and police officers to falsify custody papers and suppress missing child reports. The federal investigation currently underway has already resulted in 3 additional arrests related to this corruption network." The courtroom erupted in whispered conversation. Judge Adegoke's gavel came down sharply. "Order. I will have order in this courtroom." She turned her attention to Uncle Chima directly. "Mr. Okafor, do you have the original custody documents you claim gave you legal guardianship of this child?" Uncle Chima's lawyer whispered urgently in his ear. But Uncle Chima shook his head and spoke directly to the judge, his voice rough but controlled. "The documents were destroyed in a fire 3 years ago. But I've been caring for the boy properly. He has food, shelter, work that teaches him valuable skills." "Work?" Judge Adegoke's eyebrow rose. "This child is 12 years old. What kind of work?" The question hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. Uncle Chima's lawyer tried to intervene, but the judge's sharp look silenced him. "I asked Mr. Okafor directly. I expect a direct answer." Uncle Chima's mask of reasonableness cracked slightly. "Mechanical work. Teaching him auto repair. Better than wasting time in schools that teach nothing useful." "Let me be very clear," Judge Adegoke said, her voice cutting like ice. "Are you telling this court that you've had a 12-year-old child performing labor in an auto repair workshop? A child with no apparent school enrollment records?" She shuffled through papers. "A child who, according to medical records, hasn't seen a doctor in 8 years despite mandatory vaccination requirements." The truth was unraveling in real time, each question pulling another thread from Uncle Chima's carefully constructed lie. His lawyers conferred urgently, but they had no good answers, no way to spin child exploitation into benevolent guardianship. "Your Honor," Chisholm stood again, sensing the moment. "We'd like to call Liam Okoro to testify, if the court permits. He's prepared to describe his living conditions and the circumstances of his care." Judge Adegoke looked at Liam directly for the first time. "Young man, would you be willing to answer some questions?" Liam stood, his thin frame somehow commanding despite his worn clothes and obvious nervousness. "Yes, Your Honor." His voice was steady, clear, carrying the intelligence that had sustained him through 8 years of exploitation. "I want to tell the truth about what happened to me." The judge nodded slowly. "Approach the witness stand." What followed was the most painful 30 minutes of Adana's life. She watched Liam calmly describe his kidnapping from daycare, his years in the workshop, the labor he'd performed, the education he'd been denied. He spoke without drama, without exaggeration, just stating facts in his precise, brilliant way. But the facts themselves were damning enough. "He locked you in the workshop?" Judge Adegoke asked, her professional composure cracking slightly. "Yes, Your Honor. On Fridays when he collected payments. And at night, to make sure I didn't run away." "Did you ever try to escape?" "Twice, Your Honor. When I was 7 and when I was 9. Both times, police officers brought me back to Uncle Chima. They didn't file reports. They just told me to be grateful I had a place to stay." The courtroom fell silent. Judge Adegoke's face had gone from professionally neutral to visibly angry. "Officers brought you back? Did they ask if you were safe? Did they investigate?" "No, Your Honor. Uncle Chima gave them money both times. I saw him hand them cash after they left me in the workshop." Liam's voice remained steady, but Adana saw his hands trembling slightly. "That's when I learned that running wouldn't work, that I had to wait for a different kind of help." "And that help came in the form of Dr. Miles?" Judge Adegoke gestured toward Adana in the gallery. "Yes, Your Honor. I called her by accident when Uncle Chima got hurt. She came to help even though she didn't know us. She kept coming back. She was the first person in 8 years who saw me as a person instead of free labor." The judge looked at Adana with an expression that mixed gratitude and sadness. "Doctor, please approach." Adana stood on shaking legs and moved to the witness stand as Liam returned to his seat beside Amara. Judge Adegoke studied her carefully. "You're a neurosurgeon at Lagos Central Hospital. What compelled you to involve yourself in this situation?" Adana took a breath, finding her truth. 6 months ago, I lost a patient during surgery. A 7-year-old girl named Zara. I've been struggling with that loss. When Liam called asking for help, something in his voice reminded me why I became a doctor. To help people who needed someone in their corner. She paused. The more I learned about his situation, the more I realized this was a child being systematically failed by every institution that should have protected him. I couldn't ignore that. I wouldn't. Judge Adegoke nodded slowly, then turned her attention back to Uncle Chima. "Mr. Okafor, I've heard enough. This court finds overwhelming evidence of child exploitation, falsified custody documents, and systemic corruption. The federal investigation will determine criminal charges. But for the purposes of this custody hearing, my decision is clear." She picked up her gavel. "Emergency custody is granted immediately to Amara Patience Okoro. All parental rights of Chima Okafor, claimed or otherwise, are hereby terminated. Furthermore, I'm ordering psychological evaluation and educational assessment for Liam Okoro to determine what support services he'll need moving forward." The gavel came down, and the sound echoed through the courtroom like thunder. Amara burst into tears, clutching Liam to her chest. Uncle Chima lunged toward them, his handcuffs jangling, his face twisted with rage. "You can't do this. That boy owes me 8 years of..." "8 years of what, Mr. Okafor?" Judge Adegoke's voice cut through his outburst like a blade. 8 years of stolen childhood? 8 years of unpaid labor? 8 years of keeping a mother and son apart? She leaned forward, her eyes blazing. "You will be escorted from this courtroom immediately. And I sincerely hope that federal prosecutors throw every possible charge at you and everyone who helped you commit this atrocity." Security guards moved to restrain Uncle Chima. But before they could fully remove him, he fixed his gaze on Liam one last time. "I gave you a home. I taught you useful skills. You would have been nothing without me. I would have been free. Liam said quietly, his voice cutting through Uncle Chima's rage. I would have been with my mother. I would have had a childhood. You didn't give me anything. You stole everything. And now everyone knows it. The truth of it silenced Uncle Chima more effectively than any gavel or legal argument. He was dragged from the courtroom, still protesting, but his words had lost their power, revealed as the desperate lies of a criminal facing justice. Judge Adegoke addressed the remaining people in her courtroom. This case represents a profound failure of multiple systems that should have protected this child. I'm ordering a full investigation into how 73 missing child reports were ignored, how custody documents were falsified, and how corrupt officials enabled this situation to continue for 8 years. She looked at Amara directly. Ms. Okoro, you have your son back. I'm sorry it took 8 years and the intervention of a stranger for the system to finally work as it should have from the beginning. The court will provide resources for counseling, educational support, and any other services Liam needs. Then she turned to Adana. Dr. Miles, your intervention likely saved this child's life. However, I must note that some of your methods, obtaining evidence from a private residence, for example, skirted legal boundaries. In this case, the overwhelming evidence of wrongdoing justifies the outcome. But I caution you against making this a habit. Adana nodded, accepting the gentle rebuke. Understood, Your Honor. Though I'd do it again in a heartbeat if another child needed help. Judge Adegoke's stern expression softened slightly. I believe you would. Court is adjourned. The gavel fell one final time, and suddenly it was over. 8 years of searching, 8 years of exploitation, 8 years of stolen time, all resolved in one courtroom hearing. Amara stood, still holding Liam, tears streaming down her face. Chisholm gathered the legal documents, her professional composure cracking into a genuine smile. Dr. Okonkwo, who'd been sitting quietly in the back, approached with congratulations and offers of continued support. And Adana stood watching it all, feeling the final walls around her heart crumble into dust. She'd spent 6 months building barriers to protect herself from pain, from failure, from the possibility of hurting anyone else the way she'd hurt Zara's family. But in tearing down Uncle Chima's exploitation, in fighting for Liam's freedom, she'd inadvertently torn down her own prison walls as well. She wasn't healed. Healing took time, took work, took ongoing effort. But she was free. Free to feel, free to fight, free to fail and try again. Free to be human, flawed and broken, and still somehow useful. Liam detached himself from his mother and crossed to Adana, looking up at her with those brilliant, resilient eyes. Thank you, he said simply, for answering a wrong number, for not hanging up, for not giving up. Adana knelt down to his level, taking his thin hands in hers. Thank you for calling, for trusting, for surviving, for being brave enough to want more than what you were given. She smiled through her tears. Now go be brilliant. Go learn everything. Go become the person Uncle Chima tried to prevent you from being. And know that your mother and I will be right beside you, fighting for you every step of the way. 3 months later, Adana stood in the auditorium of Lagos Science Academy, watching Liam receive his scholarship certificate. The past 12 weeks had been a whirlwind of psychological evaluations, educational assessments, legal proceedings against the corruption network that had enabled Uncle Chima, and the slow, careful process of healing trauma that couldn't be rushed. Liam had tested at a high school level in mathematics and science, despite never attending formal school past second grade. His self-taught education from water-damaged books and practical experience in the workshop had given him knowledge that astounded the educators evaluating him. The academy had offered him a full scholarship, including counseling services and academic support to fill in the gaps left by 8 years of stolen education. Amara sat beside Adana, her health improving after Adana had connected her with proper diabetes treatment and helped her reduce her work hours so she could actually attend to her medical needs. The two women had become unlikely friends, bound by shared purpose and the child they both loved in different ways. On stage, Liam accepted his certificate with quiet dignity, his thin frame filling out slightly after 3 months of regular meals and proper care. When asked to say a few words, he stepped to the microphone with the confidence of someone who'd survived the worst and emerged stronger. 3 months ago, I was locked in a workshop, being used for free labor, convinced I had no future beyond fixing engines and surviving, Liam said, his voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. I believed the lies I'd been told, that my mother didn't want me, that I was worthless, that no one would help me even if I asked. He paused, his eyes finding Amara and Adana in the crowd. Then a doctor answered a wrong number on a stormy night, and everything changed. Not because she was perfect, she'd tell you herself she's not, but because she was willing to fight for someone she didn't know, to risk her career and reputation to save a child the system had forgotten. Adana felt tears on her face, felt the weight of 6 months of grief and 3 months of redemption pressing against her chest. My mother never stopped searching for 8 years, Liam continued, never gave up, even when everyone told her to. And a stranger became an ally when she could have just driven away. He looked directly at them now. I learned something important from both of them. That family isn't just about blood or legal papers. It's about the people who fight for you when you can't fight for yourself. It's about showing up, even when it's hard, even when it's scary, even when the system is designed to make you fail. The audience applauded, but Liam wasn't finished. Uncle Chima is in prison now, along with 6 other people who helped him. Corrupt police officers, social workers who took bribes, the daycare owners who facilitated my kidnapping. The investigation is still ongoing, and prosecutors say there will be more arrests. His voice hardened slightly. Good, because what happened to me happens to other children too. Children who are trafficked, exploited, forced into labor, stolen from their families. The system that failed me for 8 years fails other children every day. And until that changes, until we fix the corruption that makes exploitation possible, my story isn't really over. He took a breath, his young face carrying a weight of purpose beyond his years. So I'm going to learn everything I can here at this academy. I'm going to study law and technology and social systems. And someday, I'm going to build tools and systems that make it harder for people like Uncle Chima to steal childhoods. I'm going to make sure that when a mother files a missing child report, someone actually investigates. That when a child calls for help, someone answers. The applause was thunderous now, people rising to their feet. Adana saw other parents crying, saw teachers nodding with fierce pride, saw Liam's story touching something deep in everyone present. After the ceremony, they gathered outside the auditorium. Amara, Liam, Adana, Dr. Okonkwo, and Chisom. The lawyer had successfully prosecuted the corruption network, securing convictions that had sent shockwaves through Lagos social services. Changes were happening, slowly, as the scandal forced institutional reforms. I have news, Chisom said, pulling out her phone. The Justice Minister announced this morning that they're creating a new independent oversight committee for missing child cases. Every report will be reviewed by federal officers who can't be bribed by local criminals. They're calling it Liam's Law. The significance of it hit them all at once. One child's nightmare, 8 years of suffering, had sparked systemic change that could protect countless other children. Liam's face showed a mixture of pride and sadness. It shouldn't take what happened to me for the system to work properly. But if my story can prevent even one other child from being stolen. He didn't finish, but he didn't need to. They all understood. Amara pulled him close. 8 years of lost embraces condensed into every hug. I'm so proud of you, baby. Not just for surviving, but for choosing to use your pain to help others. That takes a courage I'm not sure I could manage. You managed it for 8 years, Liam pointed out. You never gave up searching, never stopped fighting. I learned how to fight from you, even when I didn't know I was learning it. Adana watched them, mother and son healing together, and felt her own healing continuing in parallel. She'd returned to surgery 2 months ago, her hands steady, her focus clear, her fear of failure transformed into determination to do better. She still thought about Zara, would probably always think about Zara, but now she also thought about Liam, about choosing to fight instead of hide, about answering the call when it came, even if it terrified her. Thank you, Amara said quietly to Adana, the two of them standing slightly apart from the others. For everything. For saving my son. For helping us rebuild our lives. For being the person who finally saw him and refused to look away. Adana shook her head. I should be thanking you. 6 months ago, I was drowning in guilt and isolation. Convinced that my failure with Zara meant I had nothing left to offer. Liam's call reminded me that one failure doesn't define a life. That broken people can still be useful. That redemption is possible if you're willing to fight for it. She smiled. Besides, I'm the one who answered the wrong number. Technically, this is all Liam's fault for having terrible phone skills. They both laughed, and it felt good. Felt healing. Felt like the beginning of something new. Not replacement for what had been lost. Nothing could replace Amara's 8 years with Liam or bring back Zara, but something valuable in its own right. Connection, purpose, the knowledge that they'd fought against corruption and won. Dr. Okonkwo approached, his weathered face creased with a smile that seemed to take years off his appearance. Adana, I want you to know how proud I am of you. 6 months ago, you were the most talented surgeon I'd ever trained. But you'd lost your passion, your drive. You were going through the motions, technically perfect, but emotionally dead. He gestured toward Liam, who was now talking animatedly with some academy students about a robotics project. This boy gave you back your fire, and in the process, you've inspired the entire hospital staff. Applications to our pediatric program have tripled since news of the case went public. Doctors want to work at a hospital where their colleagues fight for patients outside the operating room too. Adana felt warmth spread through her chest. She'd been so focused on Liam's healing that she hadn't considered the broader impact of their story. The hospital board asked me to pass along a message, Dr. Okonkwo continued. They want to create a pro bono medical program for at-risk children. Free examinations, treatments, vaccinations for kids who fall through the system cracks. They're calling it the Second Chance Initiative, and they want you to head it up. The offer took her breath away. Not just a return to surgery, but a formal program to help children like Liam, to catch the ones the system missed. to ensure that lack of money or documentation never prevented a child from receiving medical care. Adana's voice caught. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Amara encouraged. Say you'll keep fighting for the children who need someone in their corner. Say you'll turn this one miracle into a system of miracles. Adana looked at the people gathered around her. Amara, who'd never stopped searching. Liam, who'd survived and chosen purpose over bitterness. Dr. Okonkwo, who'd believed in her even when she'd stopped believing in herself. Chisholm, who'd fought corruption with law books and righteous fury. She thought about Zara, the failure that had broken her. And she thought about Liam, the wrong number that had saved her. Yes, she said firmly. Yes, I'll do it. I'll head the program. I'll fight for every child the system tries to forget. Chisholm raised her coffee cup in a toast. To second chances. For children, for broken surgeons, for everyone brave enough to answer when someone calls for help. They clinked cups, coffee, tea, juice from Liam's scholarship celebration. And Adana felt the last remaining walls around her heart crumble completely. She was free. Free to feel, free to fail, free to try again. Free to be imperfect and still valuable. Free to build something meaningful from the wreckage of her guilt and Liam's suffering. The call that no one expected, a wrong number on a stormy night, had revealed truths that changed multiple lives. It revealed that Liam hadn't been abandoned, but stolen. That Amara hadn't given up, but been systematically failed. That corruption could be exposed and fought. That redemption was possible for broken surgeons haunted by their failures. But most importantly, it revealed that sometimes the wrong call is exactly the right call. That mistakes can lead to miracles. That being willing to answer, even when you're terrified, even when you're broken, even when you don't know if you can help. That willingness itself can change everything. 6 months ago, Adana had let a 7-year-old girl die and decided she had nothing left to offer the world. 3 months ago, she'd answered a 12-year-old boy's desperate plea and discovered she had everything to offer. Her skills, her resources, her determination, her willingness to fight. The difference wasn't in her abilities. Those had remained constant. The difference was in her choice. To answer instead of ignore. To fight instead of hide. To build bridges instead of walls. As they prepared to leave the academy, Liam tugged on Adana's sleeve. Can I ask you something? Anything, Adana promised. Liam's expression was serious, thoughtful. That girl you told me about, Zara, the one you couldn't save, do you think she'd be happy that you saved me instead? The question was so earnest, so pure, that Adana felt her breath catch. She knelt down to Liam's level, taking his hands in hers the way she had in the courtroom 3 months ago. I think Zara's mother would want what I want. For no child to suffer unnecessarily. For doctors to fight for their patients with everything they have. For the system to work the way it's supposed to work. She paused, finding the right words. I can't change what happened to Zara. I'll carry that failure for the rest of my life, and I should. But I can honor her memory by fighting for other children. By making sure her death meant something, taught me something, made me better. Liam nodded slowly. Like how I can't change what Uncle Chima did to me. But I can use what I learned to help other kids. Turn something bad into something good. Exactly, Adana said. We don't get to choose what happens to us, Liam. But we get to choose what we do with it. We get to choose whether our pain makes us bitter or better. Whether our failures break us permanently or break us open. so light can get in. She stood up, offering her hand. "Come on, your mother wants to take us all to dinner to celebrate. And I want to hear more about this robotics project you're working on." As they walked toward the parking lot, Adana's phone rang. Unknown number. She almost declined it, then remembered another unknown number 3 months ago, another call she almost didn't answer, another moment when everything changed. She accepted the call. "Dr. Miles? This is Chinwe Obi from Lagos Child Services. I have a situation with a child who's been trafficked for domestic labor, and I heard about your work with the Okoro case. The girl won't talk to anyone, won't eat, won't trust anyone. I was wondering." Adana looked at Liam and Amara, at the family they'd fought so hard to reunite. Then she looked at her phone, at this new call for help, this new child who needed someone willing to fight. "Tell me everything," Adana said, her voice steady and sure. "I'm on my way." Because that's what you did when someone called. You answered. You fought. You refused to let the system's failures become another child's nightmare. You turned wrong numbers into right choices. You built bridges where walls had been. You saved who you could, honored who you couldn't, and kept fighting for the ones who needed someone in their corner. The call no one expected had revealed the truth that changed everything. That broken people could still heal others. That wrong numbers could save lives. That one person choosing to answer, choosing to fight, choosing to care, could spark changes that rippled outward in ways they might never fully know. Adana Miles drove toward her next case, toward another child who needed help. And she didn't feel broken anymore. She felt purpose. She felt alive. She felt ready. And it had all started with a wrong number on a stormy night, and a 12-year-old boy who'd called for help and found salvation in the voice of a stranger who chose to answer.